And joining me in the studio, Dr. Constantino Xavier. He's a fellow with Brookings India, someone who's been tracking the situation in Sri Lanka very closely. And Alan Keenan, Sri Lanka Project Director for the International Crisis Group, with us from London. Good evening to both of you. Constantino, there's talk of a consensus candidate. Do you see this deadlock being resolved?
Well, I think in this crisis, there's no consensus at all. We saw that in these images, far from it. I think there's on one side the outgoing, if you want, or Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, who's interested in keeping this parliament because he knows he has a majority of support in the parliament. And you have an opposition led by Mahinda Rajapaksa, who knows that he will be able to gain by going to elections. Therefore, is calling for elections by instigating a lot of conflict and pressure on the president.
Alan, do you see a compromise on the horizon?
Who knows? I think there are efforts to make that happen. I think, unfortunately, what I was just hearing before we came on air was that the president has rejected this second no confidence motion, and that he has told certain MPs that he's refusing to reappoint Ranil Wickremesinghe. So if that stays the case, if that is the case and stays that way, then they'll have to find somebody else. I don't see how you can get around the president, even though, in fact, he's not allowed to pick and choose, especially given that the parliament has made clear twice that it rejects Mahinda Rajapaksa. It's really in Sirisena's ballpark or in his court. It's hard to know what's going to happen.
I've also read some reports and analysis which says that by pitting Rajapaksa against Wickremesinghe, the president may be ensuring that he gets another term in office.
I'd find that hard to believe. I mean, I think Sirisena's credibility with both the political class and the public at large has collapsed. I think his actions over the last few weeks have really destroyed him politically. I'd be very surprised if he can find a way to a second term at this stage. But who knows? Sri Lankan politics is full of surprises.
Constantino, most people who've watched this situation have said that this is a domestic crisis. And foreign players, even though they have interest in Sri Lanka, may not have contributed to the way things have developed right now. Where do you see India's role then in this?
See, there's an old principle in Indian foreign policy called masterly inactivity. And it means that basically when there are very deep crises in the neighborhood, you tend to be restrained and stay away and think about what you really can support in terms of what you can give to the resolution of the crisis. I think the crisis is so deep that there's a realization that it's very difficult to play any role in here. And you're going to have to step back. And like the Ministry of External Affairs statement recently mentioned, focus on democracy and the importance of democracy, appealing to that. But at the same time, and this is the dilemma here in Delhi and the tension, you want this to be played out peacefully, democratically, through stability, but you know that the balance of power shifted in Sri Lanka, and that Ranil Wickremesinghe had not only an uncooperative relation with President Sirisena, they were actually hostile to each other, undermining each other, and therefore that alliance is unsustainable. So you realize that in many ways the popular sentiment is favoring Mahinda Rajapaksa, a possible comeback, most probably through elections. The question is how and how soon.
Well, the alliance that has just been broken was always a tenuous one, and they weren't always on the best of terms, I understand. But Alan, do you see China then playing a role? They were the first ones to congratulate Rajapaksa a day after he was installed in the Prime Minister's chair.
Well, I mean, I think all the major foreign players, China, India, the U.S., the EU to a lesser extent, they're all playing a role. They're all sending messages. No doubt there's lots of behind-the-scenes discussions. I mean, I think the important thing, and I'm sure, China definitely is part of that. I think the important thing for those countries which are committed to democratic principles and want Sri Lanka to remain committed to sort of playing these things out according to democratic and constitutional procedures is to make it clear to those who have and might be tempted again to violate those norms that there will be a price to pay if they continue to do so, whether that's in terms of reduced economic benefits, making it harder to get visas to visit Western countries, or less support from India in various ways that India has supported and been engaged with Sri Lankan politicians and government officials. So I think those messages need to be sent, and I think some of them probably are being sent. But in terms of any direct involvement, I don't think there's a particular role to be played.
The protagonists don't seem to be showing any signs of wanting a patch-up or a consensus. For how long can Sri Lanka, the governance, the economy, afford to be in this sort of a limbo? There's no prime minister, there's no cabinet. People don't know who is going to clear the projects or the deals. Even
worse, I think for the last year we've seen this erosion of governance in Sri Lanka happening. The public finances are in extremely difficult condition. There's been a conflict between the president and the prime minister about various projects, whether to give them to the Chinese or to India, which is one of the ways I think Delhi realized also that this was becoming a liability. And still is a liability. So there is an interest in returning Sri Lanka to stability. I don't see much hope in the current setup in this parliament. But while elections are not allowed to take place before 2020, basically, it's going to be very difficult. But elections would be ideally the outcome. And that's something which India often has welcomed in the region, that when there is a stalemate, elections really allow for more clarity to come up. But just a point on China, there's a very simplistic adoption that somehow Ranil Wickremesinghe is pro-India and Sirisena and that Mahinda Rajapaksa is a pro-China person. I think that's extremely questionable. I think all of these leaders are going to be Sri Lanka first. They're going to pursue their interests. They're going to play a balancing game, trying to play off China and India. So there's not much to gain by, using one side or the other at this point.
But politics is a game of perception, and this is the perception at least. Alan, final question to you. How do you see these players resolving this, and the next court hearing is on the 19th of December. If a resolution comes at all, do you believe it will only come in the courts?
No, I believe the Supreme Court will be taking up for further argumentation the case that they decided on Monday with regard to the constitutionality of the president's dissolution of parliament. I think that's on the 4th, 5th, and 6th, or the 5th, 6th, and 7th of December. My hunch is that that it's quite possible there'll be a resolution before that, and I think it would probably be something along the lines of an agreement by the UNP to face elections sometime in the next few months. But they want to do it. They want to save face because, that it's been Mahinda Rajapaksa's main goal to get elections as soon as possible. So they don't want to be seen to reward Mahinda Rajapaksa, because I think the Rajapaksa strategy currently is to cause so much chaos and to paralyze government so badly and for so long that that they get elections on their terms. So if the UNP can arrange somehow to get elections more on their terms or not to be seen to capitulate to Rajapaksa, I think that's probably the most likely and best outcome.
Breaking news coming in. A federal judge in America has ordered that US President Donald Trump must restore White House access to CNN reporter Jim Acosta.
That's true.
Jim Acosta is the chief White House correspondent for CNN. He got into a testy exchange with President Trump in a regular briefing a day after the midterm elections, after which the White House denied him access. The network argued that this violated Acosta's constitutional rights and the channels as well. Joining us is Wion's correspondent Nick Harper. This is another setback for President Donald Trump in his battle against the press.
Well, it certainly is. Yeah, it's a big win for CNN, a big blow for Donald Trump and his top aides. They were essentially trying to curtail CNN's coverage. It is well known that Donald Trump is not a fan of CNN. It is one of his main targets at rallies. He often refers to fake news, speaking directly about CNN, and there's no love lost between the president and this correspondent, Jim Acosta, at CNN. They have had run-ins in the past. So taking away the hard pass was something that CNN's lawyers was breaking two different amendment rights. First and Fifth Amendment. First Amendment is all to do with freedom of the press and freedom of speech. The Fifth Amendment was an argument that the White House was taking away his hard pass without doing the due process, essentially taking it away in an illegal fashion very quickly, as opposed to putting through the paperwork and informing him that he would have his pass taken away if there were to be other incidents. So it's a big big win for CNN, but bear in mind that this is just the beginning. The judge has made this temporary ruling that Jim Acosta can get back his hard pass immediately. He'll be able to use it today, but there will be further hearings to come, and the judge will have to weigh up whether or not the First and Fifth Amendment rights have been violated, and that will have much larger implications, not just for CNN, but for press freedoms and exactly how much power the White House has over them.
Any first reactions from Jim Acosta or the White House?
Yeah, Jim Acosta spoke outside court a couple of moments after that ruling came down. He said that he was very pleased with the ruling. He made a very brief statement and he said, now let's get back to work. But we also heard from CNN's lawyers as well, who'd argued that this was a capricious and arbitrary act from the White House. They said that it was a great day for the First Amendment and for journalism. We haven't heard from the White House yet. There hasn't been any tweets from President Trump. It's unclear if there will be any sort of press briefing at the White House later on today, but at some point the White House will need to respond to this, and as we go further forward with the other hearings, they'll need to make remarks about what they feel is the purview of their limitations on the press and exactly what sort of barriers they can put between the White House and the press corps themselves.
The president usually speaks through his tweets. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he's not said anything on Twitter about this fight with Jim Acosta, especially after the case was filed, has he?
That's right, yeah, he's all about the tweets. It's something he does very early in the morning through till very late at night. And CNN and Jim Acosta in the past have been part of his tweets, but there's been no mention, or at least no response from him or the White House's official channels on this. Because this has been working its way through the courts, his lawyers have cautioned him about mentioning this or saying anything that could potentially disrupt the case. But President Trump is known to jump onto Twitter when there is something that is bothering him or is angering him, so we could see a tweet or two within the coming hours.
Just a quick recap before I let you go. For our viewers who are not from America, what this court ruling basically says is that for the moment, until further notice, Jim Acosta will have access to the White House. Is that correct?
That's right, yes. So he will immediately get back his hard pass today. A hard pass allows him to have access to the White House, to the press areas of the White House, to the press briefing room, allows him to have access to statements that are given by the press secretary, Sarah Sanders. He will get that back immediately. However, there is the possibility, although it seems slim at this stage, considering the judge's ruling so far, that they may be able to revoke that press pass at some other point in the future, and that will all come down to what the judge says in these future hearings, and we're likely to have those in the coming weeks when the judge will have to tackle the First and Fifth Amendment rights that CNN claim were violated. The judge will have to make rulings directly on those. He hasn't done that today, but he has sided with CNN, saying that the hard pass, that being taken away, was unconstitutional, it was illegal, and it must be returned to Jim Acosta immediately. So there is more to be worked out, but at least at this stage the judge siding very firmly with CNN and therefore suggesting that the other rulings that are to come in the future weeks, we will also see the judge potentially siding with CNN as well.
Nick Harper, thanks very much for bringing us that update. So CNN has won this round, and the White House will have to restore access to Jim Acosta with immediate effect. Let's play out for you very quickly that exchange that led to this fight, which has now landed up in court.
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in this election
no,
to try to keep them?
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process, and I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your campaign.
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
They're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better. That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian
investigation
because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic. I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
I think that's unfair.
You're a very rude person. The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. You shouldn't treat people that way. Go ahead. Go ahead, Peter. Go ahead.
In Jim's defense, I've traveled with him and watched him. He's a diligent reporter who busts his butt.
Well, I'm not a
like
big fan of yours either. So
I understand.
The First Lady has launched a mission against bullying. We'll talk about that later on the show. For the moment, let's bring you a Gravitas special report. After reaching too close to a full-fledged war, a truce between Israel and Gaza seems to hold. Citizens in the Gaza Strip have started cleaning the rubble of bombed buildings, and an uneasy calm prevails. Our West Asia Bureau Chief Daniele Pagani is on the ground in Gaza, and he sent us this report.
A few days after the worst escalation between Gaza and Israel, citizens of the Palestinian coastal enclave assessed the damage and cleaned the rubble. After Hamas launched a barrage of rockets against the southern Israeli town, so the Israeli Defense Forces hit more than 100 military-sensitive targets. The main TV station that Hamas used to broadcast in the Gaza Strip was among the targets. The building is not new to devastation. Behind me lies the rubble of what remains of the headquarters of the Al-Aqsa channel. This was the TV channel that Hamas used to broadcast the news and political debates in and outside the Gaza Strip. It is not the first time that this building has been bombed. Also in 2014 it was destroyed and then rebuilt. Hamas will need to try to rebuild it as quickly as possible if they want to keep using this channel in order to deliver information to the people in the Gaza Strip. But the amount of money needed to rebuild this channel and the amount of equipment needed to rebuild this channel amounts in the millions of dollars and won't be easy to find. This building, as others targeted during the raid, is located well inside a residential block. It is surrounded by houses where common people live. When things flare up, citizens in Gaza know what to expect. They check their phones repeatedly. The Israeli army sends alerts before targeting buildings that are located inside inhabited areas. After that, citizens have a few minutes to reach to safety. The now completely destroyed building that you can see behind me was recently renewed and lies well inside the residential area. The street where it is located is where normal and common people live. There are houses on both sides of these now completely destroyed buildings. It was a 5-story building where also many collective activities were taking place inside. People living in this neighborhood have no clue if Hamas was conducting any sort of activity. Also, this neighborhood is not a neighborhood which is known to be one of Hamas's strongholds inside Gaza City. The Israeli army defines all the targets it hits as military facilities. But these are often anonymous and normal buildings located right in the middle of residential areas. The people of the neighborhood are often not aware of any activity Hamas or other factions active in Gaza conduct in the targeted buildings. There is a lot an anonymous edifice can hide in Gaza. Some of the tunnel, for instance, are hidden inside houses. The exchange of rockets between Gaza and Israel was the strongest escalation since the 2014 war. For hours, the world watched without knowing what was coming next. The choice to stop military operations prevailed on both sides, and an uneasy truce seems to be holding. After the recent escalation and the subsequent agreement on a ceasefire, which seems to be holding despite standing on very shaky ground, things here in the Gaza Strip have gone back to how they were 2 weeks ago, when money from Qatar started pouring in order to pay the salaries of those Palestinian government officers who have not received a proper salary in months. Also, fuel from Qatar came in and the Gaza Strip finally has some electricity. Everyone here senses that this is withholding as of now, but the truce is very fragile and things can flare up anytime, at any moment. Daniele Pagani in Gaza, reporting for Wion, World is One.